Hey, good evening, everyone, and we want to welcome you to the June 29th, 2023 Night with the Experts here, sponsored by Nuclear Energy Information Service based in Chicago. We do this every month on the last Thursday of each month, where we bring an expert in, and you in the audience will have an opportunity to get into conversation, ask questions, get into dialogue with each other on the particular topics that we have for that month. And this month, I am really, really excited to have an old friend and colleague join us. Alfred Meyer, who I've known for many, many years, has been an activist on a lot of fronts, both the nuclear weapons front and the nuclear power front. In his resume, he's been associated with groups like Physicians for Social Responsibility, both in Wisconsin and nationally, the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability. He's been working with Peace Action and the Manhattan Project for a nuclear-free world, and also has been involved with it's kind of near and dear to my heart, the Friends of Chernobyl centers in the United States. So tonight, we're going to examine, I hope, the connections between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. It's something that after all these years, has been a real sore point for me, that these two movements, which have such importance in terms of their issue and in terms of what's at stake, have not been able to really unify. And I'm hoping to get into that a little bit tonight. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Alfred, and we will get started here in just a moment. So. All right, Alfred, the show is yours.
Thank you very much, Dave. And I want to start out tonight by thanking you, Dave, and NEIS, Nuclear Energy Information Service out of Chicago, for the decades of wonderful work you've done and the effort you've made to educate people about the nuclear threats. And it's just a real honor to be part of this program. I also just want to pay homage to one of my mentors, Dr. Jeff Patterson, who died in 2014 unexpectedly, but a great pioneer or worker against nuclear threats. And he actually, I found out just recently, had been scheduled to be the very first speaker the night with the experts. So I feel a special, very personal reverence, really, for Jeff. And I just want to mention one thing, one idea that Jeff shared with me, as he shared with so many others, that is that this nuclear enterprise is an unplanned, out of control human experiment that about irradiating the biosphere. And we aren't finding out what it's doing, but we're doing it to ourselves. So this is a grave threat to the fate of humanity. And the other thing that Jeff talked about that he and Dave came up with was the idea of scum, secrecy, cover up, and minimization. And this is how the nuclear establishment handles our concerns. And I think it's very important for us to try to understand what that nuclear establishment is, and to come to an understanding about how it works and how we can work to influence it. And I'd like to say that, you know, this nuclear enterprise, even from Marie Curie's earliest discoveries of this magical power in this rock, there's been this huge hope for this really magical elixir for mankind that will give us unlimited energy and solve all the problems of agriculture and medicine and so many other things. And this is what the nuclear, the splitting of the atom has been billed as. A 1954 National Geographic article suggested that the US taxpayer up to 1954 had spent about 12 B as in boy billion on the nuclear enterprise, both for defense and peaceful purposes. And that they reckoned at that point it was probably the industry with the highest rate of investment of any in the United States. So this is a huge, vast enterprise. And even before the atomic bomb was dropped, in early 1944, Leslie Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project, called together the leading advertising experts of the day and put them to work about what they would say once the bomb was dropped and the secret of the Manhattan Project was made public and would have to be explained somehow. And what they wanted to do was somehow make people like it, explain enough to satisfy people so that they'd really support it, but not give away any military secrets or any scientific secrets that have military applications. At the same time, the story is promoted that the reason we won the Second World War was because of the nuclear weapons, that we would have lost 1 million people in the invasion of Japan. But in fact, Japan was, we were deep in negotiations for their surrender. So that really is not very accurate either. So from the get-go, this nuclear experiment has really been problematic. I got interested in nuclear power, and it was being sold to us as the solution to climate change. And a few years ago, I read yet one more expert critique of why nuclear power cannot solve climate change. I forget, it might have been from the Rocky Mountain Institute. I mean, there's a whole collection of them, starting really with Arjun Makhijani's book, Carbon-Free, Nuclear-Free, a roadmap for US energy policy, published in 2007. So it's clear that it really can't solve climate change. But that's what it's sold to us as doing. And when I finished reading this critique of it, it occurred to me, the critique is spot on. It's flawless, it's irrefutable, but you know what? It doesn't do a darn bit of good. It doesn't change the trajectory of the enterprise. And that's when I came across a report by U.S. Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz from 2017, in which he called the civilian nuclear energy was an essential enabler of national security. And in this context, I define national security as nuclear weapons and the nuclear navy, the capacity with which to deliver them. And what Mr. Moniz is saying is that the infrastructure needed to keep almost 100 reactors on land running is of essential assistance to our enterprise of keeping almost 100 reactors at sea operating. And that having those two big fleets of reactors gives us the capacity to work on our nuclear weapons programs. So this was Secretary Moniz saying this. And furthermore, the Atlantic Council, which is a Washington, D.C. think tank, very mainstream, very well regarded, generally speaking, they calculated that the civilian nuclear power contributes $42.4 B as in boy billion annually towards our national security. So that's the value of civilian nuclear power and to the military endeavor. If it weren't for the civilian programs, we'd have to appropriate another $42.4 billion every year just to keep things running from the defense side. And Dave, how am I doing on time? I forgot to set up.
Doing fine.
So It's my contention, and I want to offer this as a hypothesis, that what is really driving the entire nuclear enterprise are nuclear weapons and the nuclear navy. And the rest of any discussion is really false advertising promises, you could say. It's diversionary tactics. It doesn't have to be cheap. It doesn't have to be clean. It doesn't have to be safe. We don't really have to worry about the waste. And it doesn't have to solve climate change, because what it's doing is making nuclear weapons. So anyway, I just invite you to try out kind of that perspective as you consider nuclear things and see how it fits. And I want to make a few comments about small modular nuclear reactors, because I've come across some kind of interesting information which kind of highlights what is the purpose of small modular reactors, for instance. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the document that President Trump issued 6 days after January 6th, 2021. On the 12th of January, he issued a report or an executive order supporting small modular reactors for defense and space exploration. That's what they're for. And he said that, to quote this, he said, "Nuclear energy is critical to United States national security," unquote. And further on, he states in this order, ordering that we get going on making these new modular reactors, "The ability to use small modular reactors will help maintain and advance the United States dominance and strategic leadership across the space and terrestrial domains." Space and terrestrial domains, unquote. That's what Donald Trump thought small modular reactors were for. And, maybe it's one of the times he was telling the truth, actually. But not long after Trump left office and Biden came in, Biden's been doling out money for small modular reactors right, left, and center. For instance, the State Department committed $5.3 million to launch the foundational infrastructure for responsible use of small modular reactor technology programs. And this is to help countries figure out if they can use small modular reactors, if they can be our customers. In 2022, the State Department, again, committed $14 million towards a front-end engineering and design study about deploying a small modular reactor in Romania. Another $14 million was coughed up by the Romanian company and NuScale Power, a United States firm. And the sales pitch for this one says this business could be worth $1 billion in a little while. So what a great investment. At the same time, I don't know if any of you remember the Global Nuclear Energy Partnership that George Bush founded in the early 2000s. Well, I didn't know this, but it has been replaced, pardon me while I'm trying to find old terms, by something called the International Framework for Nuclear Energy Cooperation, otherwise known as IFNEC. This was in 2010. This was formed as an offshoot of GNEP. And currently it has 33 participant countries in this program, with an additional 31 observer countries and 5 international organizations. And in aggregate, there are some 72 different designs for small modular reactors being worked on in 18 different countries. So I would suggest we aren't quite at the days of being standardized with small modular reactors. But Biden is selling the small modular reactors as a solution to climate change. And that's why we need them. But really, the small modular reactors are for propulsion units for the nuclear navy. And they're also to develop, there was a big push to develop the entire uranium fuel chain domestically. And that is intended to include HALEU fuel, which is another scurrilous program, which is sold to us as being for solving climate change, but it's really for the military applications. So anyway, I think I'm going to stop my presentation at this point with the hopes that some people might have some questions and comments. If I'm missing the boat on this, I want to hear it, but for all I can tell, this, I should mention one other thing. And this, I really do owe Mr. Moniz a thank you note. The supply chain for the nuclear navy, according to his 2017 report, is found in a mere 44 of the 50 United States. So this makes this whole nuclear endeavor quite popular from a bipartisan standpoint. And there was just recently a bipartisan bill introduced in Congress to support advanced reactor technology. So my point, to summarize, is that I'm quite convinced. I can't offer all the proof of every step of it, but that what's driving the bus of the nuclear enterprise is nuclear weapons and the nuclear navy and the vast, vast array of industrial enterprises, academic enterprises, scientific enterprises, the national labs. I mean, this is a huge, vast endeavor. And it gets covered up, the energy department, that sounds like there are solar panels and wind turbines. No, that's 64% of their budget is nuclear weapon stuff. But anyway, I think we have to know what's driving the bus, because otherwise, I felt like this report I read saying nuclear power can't solve climate change hit the bullseye. It cannot do that. But that's a false target. That's not what's driving the bus. So anyway, I look forward to some discussion about this.
Hey, thank you, Alfred. Before actually we move into the next section of our discussion tonight, I want to give you the opportunity in the announcements that we had sent out inviting people to attend tonight. We also mentioned that you had a couple of articles published in the Progressive, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to let people know what they are, and if they want, they can go back to their invite and read those articles. You want to fill us in?
Sure. The first one listed there is titled "It's All About the Bomb," and that's a very brief summary history of how Atoms for Peace, how Eisenhower really was confronted with a military that was absolutely devoted to nuclear weapons as being the path of domination for the world, period, no discussion, and a world population that was aghast at what nuclear weapons had done. And there were many different moves through the UN and other endeavors to control nuclear weapons, to get rid of nuclear weapons. So Eisenhower was stuck with, which is it? And he was actually freaked out in August of 1953 because the Russians exploded a very sophisticated hydrogen bomb. And the US knew that the Russians had a bomb program, but they didn't think it was so sophisticated. Eisenhower almost had a fireside chat, or I could call it a mushroom cloud chat, with the population of the US saying, we're in deep doo-doo with these weapons. But instead, he came up with this idea of atoms for peace. We're going to take the peaceful atom, the peaceful U-235, and we're going to spread that around the world. And it's going to bring untold energy that's too cheap to meter, even though the government report at that time said the biggest problem with nuclear power was the cost. But anyway, it's been promoted with false purposes.
And you had a second one, ethics for failure?
So that one, so yes, so that it's all about the bomb. It really ties together the Moniz report, and there are links in the web postings where it can take you like to the Moniz report, which I commend people to read. The other one is about the F-35 jet fighter plane made by Lockheed Martin, which is just recently arrived in my old hometown of Madison, Wisconsin, also based in Burlington, Vermont. And it's just a pretty, well, this is a brief history of a huge topic. So I really can't go into, the article doesn't go into a lot of these details. It's things like they were going to base it in Burlington, Vermont. And the Air Force first said there are no houses nearby. And then people in Vermont said, no, there are 1,000 houses near the airport. And the Air Force said, okay, we'll put it someplace else. Patrick Leahy went head over heels, turned cartwheels and got it put back in Vermont. It's worth about $100 million a year to the state that bases these things. And those are the only two bases in civilian settings. And it's the power of the military industrial complex is exemplified by Lockheed Martin, is that even Bernie Sanders, who legitimately rants and rails against the spending of the military industrial complex, supports the F-35s in Vermont. It's that bad, folks. I mean, they really run the show. And just by the by, Lockheed Martin also does the U.S. Census for us. So, it's if you happen to look at that article, my first link to Lockheed Martin takes you to pages upon pages of what shows what they produce. All the different products, and it's a bone-chilling rendition. But anyway, I want to hear from you folks out in the audience.
All right, well,
thanks
you, Dave, for giving us a little background on that. And I invite those of you who are with us tonight to go check out those articles in the Progressive. All right, so we're going to shift to the second part of our program. Many of you are regulars here, so you kind of know what's going on, but I'll go over it anyway. Tonight, we're a little short-staffed, so I'm kind of running the whole show. And normally, my esteemed partner, Jan Budart, who's on vacation, would run this part of the program. The deal is you will have an opportunity to make a statement or ask a question of Alfred, and he'll respond to you. You do have the opportunity to do one follow-up, and then we will move on to the next person. Now, here's the difference between previous sessions. Because there's only one of me here tonight, the only people I will be calling on will be people who raise your hand. And the way you do that is you go down to a button either at the bottom or top of your screen that says reactions, and you click that, and you will see another pop-up that says raise hand. So if you want to ask Alfred a question or make a comment, you're going to have to raise your hand tonight. I will open the chat box, but usually we've reserved that for people who want to add links or other comments rather than asking questions specifically. So the chat is open. That's where you would put that. But if you want to talk, got to raise your hand tonight. And last but not least, just a little bit of Zoom etiquette. If you aren't speaking, make sure you are on mute. And when you do speak, make sure you take yourself off. So very simple. All right, so we have 3 people in the queue. And before I get to them, there was one other piece of housekeeping I forgot. We usually take an opportunity to introduce our board members of NEIS who make programs like this possible. So I want to start out and give Linda Lewison an opportunity to say hello. Introduce yourself, say hello.
Hi, everybody. I've been looking forward to this presentation for a long time, and it's just really important that we all learn from Alfred about these deep connections. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. And we also have Stephanie Belenko with us tonight. Stephanie?
Thank you all for listening and showing up, because there is a definite connection. There always has been, and people need to understand that. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you both. All right, let's dive into the dialogue that you wanted, Alfred. So the first question comes from Linda Lewison. Go ahead, Linda. Unmute. And
Hi, Alfred. Thank you for a wonderful presentation about a harrowing subject, making it clear. That's the first thing. So one of my questions is about the uranium infrastructure. I would just like more detail about how nuclear, the systems that were developed with nuclear reactors contribute to the making of weapons. And, you know, there's a whole, I understood that was you had to build up the uranium in various ways to be weapons ready, and how that relates to using the cover of the nuclear reactors to do that.
Okay, so I respond to that, Dave?
yes, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Linda. The concern is that we need, as a country, the U.S. needs to be self-sufficient in the whole uranium fuel chain, which is a very extensive, you know, you have the mining of the uranium ore, which leaves huge tailing deposits, which are awful environmental hazards. It has to be refined into yellow cake. Then you have to enrich it, which uses huge amounts of energy and a huge, this, you know, the Y12 enrichment facility built back in the Manhattan Project was the biggest building ever built on the face of the earth at the time for uranium enrichment. But so it's a whole big, huge, dirty infrastructure. But the notion is that we need it all inside our country for safety and security. The military applications, one example of that is HALEU fuel. HALEU stands for High Assay Low Enriched Uranium, HALEU. Excuse me, the definition of high enrichment for uranium-235 is 20% U-235. Uranium ore, it's 0.7%. So that's why, you know, it has to be enriched, why you hear in Iran all the centrifuge talk and stuff. But to HALEU fuel, this low enriched, right, it's 19.8%. So it's right up to the cutoff point. It's still called low enriched, but it's getting close. And to go from the 0.07 to the 20% almost is the lion's share of moving the uranium to weapons grade, to go from the 20 to 80 or 90%. So but there's a big race on for all different kinds of new advanced, so-called advanced fuel sources. HALEU is one of them. HALEU is the fuel that Bill Gates wants to use in his natrium reactor in Wyoming. But of course, the only place you can buy HALEU fuel today on the market is from Russia. So there is no source of HALEU fuel for Bill Gates at the moment. But so the idea is we should make it here. I think it's, you know, bad idea. Does that answer your question, Linda?
Sort of. So you build up the uranium, you enrich it, and what does it do? It goes out two doors, one for weapons and one for reactors, or how does that work?
Right. The extensive training of our customs officers to tell which U-235 is peaceful and which U-235 is war making. I'm joking. I'm being facetious. They're the same thing. It's what. Okay, to be clear, I am not saying that they're making nuclear weapons at the local nuclear power plant. No. What I am saying is that the entire vast, huge, extensive industrial infrastructure needed to operate nuclear reactors, and is the same one that you need to make nuclear weapons. So by having lots of nuclear reactors, both on land, it's almost a one-to-one correlation of reactors on land and reactors at sea that the US has. But we have many more than anybody else. So we have the biggest weapons program. So we're driving the new nuclear arms race by developing new kinds of weapons and new kinds of fuels and all that stuff.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Linda. Thanks, Alfred. Next person up is Carolyn Kroom, and if you want to ask a question, make sure you raise your hand. Go ahead, Carolyn. Go off of mute and you're up.
My question concerns I think you may have said $33.4 billion a year that nuclear power contributes towards nuclear weapons. And I just was wondering if you had a breakdown, rough breakdown of what aspects of nuclear power do go towards nuclear weapons each year. I have to admit, I don't understand. I guess I need concrete examples of the relationships between the two, because I've really only read about nuclear power and nuclear waste, and not so much about the relationship between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. So I think that would help me to understand if you have some information about how that money is used towards nuclear weaponry.
The $42.4 billion I referred to, which came from a study from the Atlantic Council. If you go to the Atlantic Council's website and Google nuclear power, national security, you'll come up. Last time I did it, I came up with 13 articles. This was one of them. I can't go into the details of how they made that calculation, and it's an indirect calculation. And it's that maybe the analogy is to use the automobile industry. You know, I think we all understand that because, and I'm using that very consciously, because when the Manhattan Project was created in secret in 1942, they created an industry at that time that was the same size as the automobile industry. And I think we all understand as just lay people that in the automobile industry, you need somebody to make doors. And even in the door, you need the door handle and the door panel, and you need the glass for the window, and you need the channel for the window to go in, and you need the, door lock, and you need, and that's just the door. Then the hinges, and it goes on ad infinitum, right? Mm-hmm. All the bits and pieces you need. The nuclear industry is the same way. They need all these highly specialized, particular little gizmos and things that do certain things. And what the ones that are at work in the nuclear reactors, the commercial nuclear reactors, civilian, they're the same parts and same materials and same manufacturing source as the one that goes into the reactor that's running as naval submarine. So it's not that nuclear power is paying the military money or giving them money, or doing something that pays them money. It's just that the industrial activity necessary for a huge civilian nuclear power program depends on the same thing you need to have a nice big nuclear weapons program. So it's just one and the same. Does that help clarify it at all?
Yes, it does. So some of the same materials and well, I guess the uranium, but also some of the same products are used in both industries.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm saying that to a great extent, the industries are one and the same. I mean, you end up at a civilian nuclear power reactor site, you're not producing weapons and milling plutonium and stuff. I mean, no, that's a different kettle of fish. But to have a big civilian nuclear power program, you need so much infrastructure, and that infrastructure is essential for weapons. You can't make a weapon without it. So if we didn't have the commercial customers, that's why they're trying to push these SMRs to foreign countries to get them to help support our industry. The nuclear power industry is in terrible shape economically. It's declining precipitously. The World Nuclear Industry Status Report goes into this wonderfully each year. It's very difficult. They're in great need of bright young science students. And many of them, would you go into making nuclear weapons, or would you go into, say, solar power in this day and age?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for your question.
Thanks, Carolyn. Okay, we have two people in the queue, Steve Sondheim and then Stephanie Belenko. Unmute yourself, Steve, and go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Alfred. It's Stephen Sondheim. Alfred and I had a long talk. We visited in New York a couple of weeks ago, and he told me about this talk, and I've been thinking about it. And just in listening to this, I mean, if we were to say the nuclear power industry is necessary and there to support both financially as well as byproducts or for the nuclear weapons industry. Let me turn the tables just a little bit. What if the world gave up nuclear power? And what if they acknowledged, and I'm not for nuclear weapons, but most of the country feels like we've got to have them. What if they were just to produce what was necessary for nuclear weapons? And I have two things to say about that. One, we might not be willing to pay the costs, because it sounds like the costs are very much shared by all the production of nuclear power. And two, would the population be willing to put that much money into the nuclear weapons industry? You see where I'm coming from. I'm coming from, they're hiding the need for nuclear power. It's not just for the power, it's for all this other stuff. And would the nuclear weapons industry be able to survive or be supported without the nuclear energy industry? You see, I hope you see where I'm coming from. What if we were just to produce nuclear weapons as much as we felt like were necessary? Could we? Would they be the backing? Would there be the finances?
Well, that's the point I was trying to make in the article, It's All About the Bomb, by saying that using the Atlantic Council's number of $42.4 billion, that's the value that civilian nuclear power contributes towards national security. And that's a lot of money. And so, yes, it's a good question. Would people be happy to appropriate it? This goes back such a long time. So the Atoms for Peace was, I really, in one way, look at that as spinning off the reactor industry to capitalism, because don't forget that the Manhattan Project was an FDR, socialist government program, and in fact, it was completely controlled by the government. We had to have legislation to allow private corporations to operate nuclear reactors. But that was done to get Wall Street to get private capital in to finance all the huge costs of building up a big fleet of reactors. And that's where Price Anderson came from, and that's where a lot of shenanigans with relaxed safety enforcement came from, because they couldn't disturb the investment climate for the private investors back in the 50s.
Well, let me ask a follow-up question. It's sort of like we've exposed, or you've exposed, that the emperor has no clothes. In other words, there's no real reason for nuclear power. Most of us believe now that it's more expensive and would take too long to affect climate change. So, what you're saying is true, that the real reason for all this support and money is to keep our nuclear weapons program going. Well, a couple of questions there. How do we expose that? And would the public see, we're caught between a rock and a hard place. We're going to have a tough time giving up nuclear weapons. We need to, the world needs to, but I just don't know how to uncouple that or attack that. Any ideas?
Well, that's the heart of the matter, Stephen, and it is a difficult question to wrestle with, but I think that's the one we have to wrestle with, because if you just try to talk about nuclear power, it makes waste, or it's just too expensive, or can't really solve, you can't build enough reactors fast enough. Those arguments don't hold water. If what I'm suggesting is true, that it's for the weapons. So yeah, I think a starting place, the current events give us some opportunities for public education. Everything from the fact that we have, the president, and remember at one point that was Donald Trump, there's always somebody carrying the nuclear football quite close to the president of the United States. And within moments, they can press a button which will end life on Earth, basically. And with the development of new weapons and faster hypersonic delivery systems and so forth, the decision-making time is becoming shorter and shorter. So we're facing, what happens when Joe Biden or Vladimir Putin gets woken at 3 a.m. and they say they're incoming missiles. You have 5 minutes to decide. And then, so that's a somewhat scary thought. The whole concept of deterrence, which is the centerpiece of our security policy. Basically, if you recall back in the day, Kissinger and Nixon actually purposefully cultivated an image of themselves as being so crazy that they really would use nuclear weapons. It was a calculated madness, appearing mad, like they'll really do it. This is security policy. This is a way that's going to keep us safe into the future, folks. I mean, I'm not sure how many people are going to buy that, but that's exactly what we're doing. And we're, stationing our nuclear weapons in NATO countries in Europe. We're sending more missile capacity to NATO countries, to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, what we're doing to Russia is quite remarkable.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, Stephanie, want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
It was almost about 2 years ago to the date that I was on a call to my representative, Representative Chuy Garcia, and it was a group from CAPA, Chicago Area Peace Action, and we were asking him to sign on to HR 669, which was prohibiting funds going for a first strike. And the other one we asked him to sign on to was HR 1554, which prohibited expenditures of DOD and DOE for research development of nuclear launch cruise missiles.
Mm-hmm.
He signed on to both of them. I don't know. And it was just a resolution. It wasn't, a bill or anything. And you had mentioned in your talk regarding some bills, current bills that are on
Yes.
Capitol Hill, but I wanted to write down those numbers, but if you could share that again.
I don't actually have the bill number.
Oh, okay.
And it's, let's see here. No, I can. Yeah, I don't have that. That's,
Well, if you find something regarding wording or something, maybe you can share that at a later time.
well, here it is. This is what
Okay.
I'm looking for. It's on April 3rd, 2023.
Okay.
5 Democrats and 5 Republicans introduced the Accelerating Deployment of Versatile Advanced Nuclear for Clean Energy, otherwise called the Advance Act of 2023. And
Okay.
they're saying that America can and should be a leader when it comes to deploying nuclear energy technology. And this bipartisan legislation puts us on a path to achieve that goal. That's what Shelley Moore Capito, the ranking member, said. And another Republican, John Barrasso from Wyoming, noted that Russia, and this is a quote from their press release about this bill, Russia and China are using nuclear energy as a weapon to advance their national interests and threaten the world. The free world is desperate for an alternative. The United States must reestablish its historic global leadership in nuclear energy. So that, this is the advance bill. I don't have a number for it and I haven't tracked it.
Okay. I was just wondering, is there anyone on Capitol Hill, any legislator that, gets what you're saying?
Probably a few I can think of. A big problem, I was at a meeting with a important senator's staff person who was in charge of climate issues. And we were talking to the office about nuclear subsidies. And the first thing we did, though, was we asked the staffer, what does your boss think about these subsidies? And this guy lit up with a big smile and he said, we all love them. There's bipartisan support for the nuclear's, bailout. It's everybody likes them. And that was the answer I felt we needed to have in mind first. Is, it's all big money for everybody. Like Moniz says, the supply chain for the nuclear Navy is in 44 states. This is the military industrial complex, right? It's just that the nuclear part of it is a huge part, and I would argue a central and driving part. That even though we spend vast, unconscionable amounts of money on other weapon systems, this is the keys to the kingdom, the nuclear stuff.
And I can't remember off the top of my head, but how many countries that have nuclear bombs, how many of them started out with nuclear power?
Technically, you say all of them, 9.
Okay.
There are 9, but the a prominent one was India using the Canadian CANDU reactor, and but it's it's the same technology. It's not that they make bombs at nuclear reactor sites. No, I'm not saying that. But when you can run a nuclear reactor, you've got the workshop to make the bombs.
I guess Saudi Arabia desperately wants one.
That's why everybody wants it. And that's why when we started, and if you go back and look at the history of Atoms for Peace, for instance, we at first would only give out isotopes for medical and agricultural research and whatnot. We're very stingy about giving away, allowing people to build reactors. But of course, that produced more demand for them. And, we spread to 42 different countries. We got nuclear programs going in. So it's the US government's the biggest proliferator of nuclear technology I can think of.
It's sad. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. I have my hand up, Alfred, so I actually have two questions, but I'm going to only ask one. But before I do that, with your permission, I would like to put up a couple of slides which actually back up a lot of what you just said. And I thought people might want to see the exact quotes. Is that all right with you?
Sure.
All right. These are from a slideshow that NEIS put together not too long ago. And it was getting across this very issue that Alfred brought up. This is the first one was Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz, and this is the exact quote that he was ascribed, talking about the interconnection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons and how essential it was for our national security. Not to be outdone, let's see if I can do this. Just a few years ago, President Macron of France got on his high horse and was also addressing some people about the issue of the interconnectedness. And he didn't hedge any language at all. He was just straight out there, that one cannot exist without the other. And he was very adamant about that. And as you all know, France is sort of the poster child around the world for nuclear power because they allegedly get so much of their electricity from nuclear power itself, except when there's a drought or when they have manufacturing defects in their reactors. So,
David, if you could go back to the first slide, please.
the Ernie, yep. Whoops, hold on. I'm having a little trouble here. Whoops. There we go. Alan?
I'd just like to make a comment. I mean, I haven't quite figured out how to characterize this, but it's this nuclear doublespeak. And, I talked about the mutually assured destruction and being crazy enough to use the weapons. But notice he says, U.S. nuclear energy sector supports the implementation of U.S. non-proliferation policy. Now, I ask you, how in the world does building more reactors help less weapons? And the idea is that if we have enough nuclear weapons, we will be strong enough that will protect us, then we can get rid of them. But this is the logic that's being used, that we need more of them so we can get rid of them.
Okay, well, thanks for indulging me and putting that up. I just thought people would benefit from that. So here's my question, though. You've been around the block on this issue, as I have for many, many years, and you've been with a number of organizations, some of which I mentioned at the beginning. It has been one of my great frustrations over the last 42 years with our colleagues and friends in the nuclear weapons and peace movement who don't seem to think that the nuclear power movement is one that they either want to associate with, they want to collaborate with, they want to support the positions of. And when you look around the world, other nations like Germany, for example, you don't find that demarcation is strong. You find that the two movements are very much in sync, in line. We don't seem to have that here. And I know you've been with PSR, Physicians for Social Responsibility. You've been with the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability. If you could just talk a little bit about your experience with this and how you've perceived it and what kind of reactions you've gotten when you've tried to build the bridges between the two movements.
Well, Dave, you point out a very critical issue, and I'm afraid I don't have any ready answers for the conundrum you present. I think part of it, I have a great interest, but I haven't completed the research of it. You know, I think there's been a huge information, or perhaps more accurately, disinformation campaign to make us like nuclear weapons, or make us like the nuclear power. You know, I think that many people would generally think, I mean, I wonder, let me put the question back to you, Dave. If you asked 10 people on the sidewalk in front of your niece office there, what do they think the nuclear power would solve climate change? What number would say yes? Or probably? Or
Well,
we should
9.5 probably. So
but what I'm suggesting is that that's not happenstance. That's not just chance. That's not like the flipping of heads and tails of a coin. That's because there's a massive educational campaign, whether it was, Walt Disney and making the movie in the 50s, the duck and cover stuff. The industry gets a lot of materials into the school systems. There are many, many, many ways that we're being groomed, if you will, to like nuclear. And that's, I can't speak specifically about what's being done, but I sense that that's what's happening with small modular reactors, that they're being, sold to us as, man, these are great. They're small, they're modular, they're mass produced, they'll be cheap, plug them in, plug and play. What could be better? But it's all hooey.
I agree. As a follow-up, I'll start out with a short story, but then come back to the original question. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Joe Cirincione, who was the former director of the Plowshares, is a foundation, I guess, on the West Coast, which is an anti-nuclear weapons organization. And I was really glad to meet him because I put in his hand a proceedings from a conference that NEIS and the Progressive Foundation, up in Luck, Wisconsin, and some German groups put together in 2003 in Hamburg, Germany, about depleted uranium. And this was a very extensive conference and conference proceedings. I still have copies of it. But I said to Joe, I said, look, we certainly are grateful for all the work that the nuclear weapons groups have done to prevent nuclear Armageddon. But I have to confront you with the fact that we've already had nuclear wars. We had them in Iraq when we used depleted uranium. We possibly had them in Afghanistan and the Balkans because there's suspected use of depleted uranium munitions there. And if you were on this call today, I would point out that both Great Britain and the United States have entered into a contract with the country of Ukraine to give them depleted uranium munitions for their tanks. So again, to me, it's this very bizarre disconnect that the mushroom cloud is something definitely we have to prevent, but it'll be death by 1,000 whatevers, U-235 atoms that are atomized through depleted uranium shells that are going to get us in the end if we keep allowing this to happen. So just any reactions or thoughts to that on how do we get these two movements to start working together to stop the whole, like you said, the whole production chain feeds both of them.
Well, I would hope that one way to address that, Dave, is if you take Moniz at his word that civilian nuclear power is an essential enabler, wouldn't you think that if you took away an essential enabler, it might slow things down? So, I mean, that's one strategy, and that's, I think, basically what we have to do. But I think that part of your challenge that you're alluding to is in the non-proliferation, well, in the Washington community, access is everything, right? So you have to be nice enough and act nice enough to get invited to the parties so you can talk to the people you want to talk to. If you really just, blurt out your full feelings right from the get-go, you may not get too many party invitations. But, so there's a certain bit of posturing about, I have to be likable. And to that extent, I think I'd circle back to this notion that there's this big disinformation campaign to, make civilian nuclear power look so important and so good and so promising and so modern, and we need it. And so that's, you don't want to, we're convinced that nuclear weapons are bad, but I have to look reasonable that we'll have nuclear power, sure, and we'll just have good controls over it and blah blah blah, but it's going against the grain. And the other thing, I don't have the facts and figures on, but it's a whole lot of money in this industry. It's a whole lot of people making a whole lot of money doing a whole lot of different things. So, everybody's got a vested interest in it.
Okay, thanks. I see we have another questioner. Jill Paulus, you want to make sure you're off mute and go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me? Hi.
Sure can.
Okay. Talking about the small nuclear reactors. I think most of the public would kind of go along with it, thinking that it's safer than what we have. And I don't think too many people even think about the large nuclear reactors being dangerous. I think what would drive the building of or just the idea that we're going to have small nuclear reactors is the investment community. Because I do know, it's not me, but I know somebody who talks about investments. He's an older guy, he's in his 80s, and he just believes that this is the way to go with his money, that he intends to leave to nieces and nephews, that, small nuclear reactors are a great investment. That's, and he reads all these investment portfolio information magazines. So it's being put out there. Now, it's not really a good investment, is it? Because it's not even, we don't really have the technology yet. So to me, it's not, but to me, the important thing would be then to kind of combat this idea. Because once people want to put their money somewhere, then money's going to be there for these reactors. And I guess that's my thought about that. It's the money will be there to drive it. It's like, why do we have so many McDonald's? It's because there's a lot of rich people who, honestly, they want to invest their money. And so it's like to dissuade people from wanting to invest their money in it. And those are the people, to me, have to reach. What do you guys think about that? And I'll stop talking.
Well, I think that in a sense, you're correct that when there are people providing funding for activities, then they happen. I think the challenge here and the suggestion I'm making that people consider is that what's driving this program is the pursuit of new nuclear weapons and, advanced propulsion units for the nuclear navy. And that's the operative force here.
Well, is the Navy, will they have money for their program without new reactor money? Or
Well,
do they have to?
To me, it's all kind of mixed in the same general pot that, the money for researching new designs of small modular reactors. There's all sorts of money for academic programs. There's a whole academic infrastructure needed here too. And this is a huge problem for the industry, is attracting bright young science students who will go into this field and do the work. Because it's not, 30 years ago, it was a hot field. Now it's kind of a backwater. So these are challenges.
Jill, if I could add a word to that. On the issue of investing, I think one of the ways to approach that with that example you gave is to point out that not all investments are created equal. Some are highly speculative and extremely risky. And if you want to throw the whole wad of your nieces and nephews' endowment on, 13 black, and you only get one spin of the wheel, you have to ask, is that a wise investment? I recall not too many years ago, Moody's, well-respected investment outfit nationwide, internationally even, downgraded utilities that had nuclear power plants. So that had an effect on their, bottom line. And I think that is one of the things to keep in mind with this notion of investment, is that, yeah, you can throw your money into it, but if it flops, and there is a high probability of it flopping, you don't get your money back, with the exception of the federal money. And that's where I think a lot of these speculative reactor designs are going to make out like bandits, because they don't have to pay the DOE back if their design doesn't work, but they happily take the DOE money to prove that it won't work, in a matter of speaking. So that would be my response to the person that you mentioned in terms of investment. You would also have to point out to the person, compared to what. And when you take a look at solar firms or wind firms, which are a growth industry in double digits every year, you have to ask, where are you going to get a better return on your investment? All right. Again, anyone else care to make a comment or raise a question at this point? Give it a second or two. Anything you want to say at this point, Alfred, to react to or add anything?
Well, about the investment, I think that it's likely that there'll always be quite a bit of government money going in. I mean, that's what I see, is that the military drivers of this endeavor will ensure that it keeps going. What that means for private investment and what you choose to invest in is a whole different question. I would like to point out a very wonderful organization called Don't Bank on the Bomb, which is run by Pax Christi. And it really identifies funders of the companies that build the nuclear weapons, and it helps you organize to talk to your own banker about not investing in nuclear weapons. And they're having some degree of success. That when people meet with people in their own community and say, look, I don't want my bank investing my money into making nuclear weapons, and it gets traction. So that's a very wonderful program that I'd recommend to people. Also, there's Back from the Brink, which is an effort which is trying to get governments at all different levels to sign up to take 5 different steps for nuclear sanity. We talked briefly about the previous legislative efforts for no first use and whatnot. There's a whole group of actions like that legislatively that could be supported. And of course, I think ultimately we need to get our country to join the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And it's a total long shot at this point, but let's keep working on it. And the Berlin Wall came down, so this could happen.
Okay, we have a person on the phone who wants to ask a question. Area code 847. If you would identify yourself first and then proceed with your question, we'd appreciate that. Take yourself off mute as well and ask your question.
Jake is my name, Jake Aaron. Sorry, I didn't have a question. I'm just listening.
Ah.
I just joined. I just joined because I was coming from another meeting. Sorry.
Okay, gotcha.
So I'll let other people ask questions.
Okay, thanks, Jay. Joan Seaman, you're up next.
Hi there. I am kind of a victim of Rocky Flats, doggone it. When I say a victim, I mean I had no idea at my young age at the time in the 80s when Rocky Flats was going to incinerate mixed radioactive waste and become a regional site initially, read EPA documents, et cetera, and find out, for 6,000 employees working at Rocky Flats, neighbors, high school friends, and you name it. And what I never see many people talking about is that it is the camaraderie that goes on between so many people that are needing jobs in this country. And so it's, especially in Colorado now with SMRs, and we had a huge, a bill where a lot of people were collaborating. And in fact, they're doing behind closed door meetings, or not behind closed doors, but just, invite only meetings. Even recently, with two communities absolutely concerned about their jobs, losing coal plants, and they want the SMRs, because, and then they're promoting, SMRs are not using the HALU and et cetera. I just wondered what you thought about, because we're seeing this in so many locations, because I follow Superfund, I follow the contamination issues all over. I mean, it's just so shocking. It's a web of contamination everywhere. But we never we never focus on what are the employees saying about their jobs and the ones that have been made ill and et cetera. And I just wondered what you thought about the jobs and the transition and promoting these small modulars for the coal plants they're shutting down and et cetera. But I just never hear anybody talking about the jobs and the need, and it's everywhere.
Right. Well, thank you for that question. The SMRs are being promoted in particular as the perfect way to phase out that dirty coal plant down the road. Just install an SMR right there. It's kind of like just swap it out and it'll be fine. So that gets a lot of sales press, but these things don't exist. You can't go buy one today. So that's really just misleading advertising. So the other issue, though, is the horrific radioactive contamination, and also contamination with the many chemicals and other components involved in the whole radioactive nuclear fuel chain. That the workers at Rocky Flats, there's an effort to expand and renew RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which was an effort by the federal government to pay the so-called atomic veterans, the people who made, back when we had 35,000 nuclear weapons, somebody made all those things. And they all got very sick, but this program exists to compensate them, but they're very slow to provide much compensation. And so it's really quite frightening and discouraging how the average worker and people and communities have been treated. And this, I think, is a great danger. Because it's a military endeavor. This is, under the guise of national security. So whatever we do is okay, because what's more important than national security?
Do you want to respond to that, Joan?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's under the guise because we don't, the sad piece is you hit it. I'm just finding out, I did not know there was this much illness around the country that that has happened. And again, we don't see much documentation on the actual employees that will speak to their illness because they need the money, just like jobs. They need the jobs everywhere. And you're right. How did we get ourselves into this with all these nuclear power plants? Hanford starting up as a location specifically for, the fuel for weapons. So, I never knew any of this link, and I'm really glad that you're there, Alfred, to begin. And Pat Morita actually brought it to my attention sometime not that long ago. And at first, when she said, this is it has a lot to do with weapons, and certainly nuclear waste is a weapon, and we certainly found it here at Rocky Flats. And I won't go into all of that, but it's that when she had said weapons, I thought, now hold it here. I can't go to the weapons side of this. And I can understand where people react immediately like, oh God, don't make me talk about weapons. And then I find out about someone who's trying to do research around our country, and we do not discuss what happened at Fukushima. I have somebody, a PhD, she's out there trying to find research literature everywhere. And it is not, we don't have it here. You don't see it in the newspapers about what's going on right now much. But anyway, I'm just so glad you're there. And I've also got to thank Pat Morita. I think she's there for, saying it to me. And again, I've just been so focused on the fear of the plutonium contamination. And by the way, you never hear many people just even using the word plutonium. And I was the one that said, wait a minute. And I think, Alfred, you said this, there's more than just, and people don't emphasize this. Yes, there's plutonium. Yes, there's cesium. We can go on with all the rad elements, but what you don't have are a couple of things. One, there are so many heavy metals that are being released from all these facilities. I don't care where they are, but they're not regulated. There are so many chemicals. Rocky Flats was just loaded with chemicals. And so what we're learning just in everything is the EPA, NRC, DOE, DOD, they don't regulate the other side of this when they do, quote, and there has been, NRC never did a health risk assessment, but it's called cumulative exposure.
Mhm.
And so we never, and I'll close with this, nobody talks about all of the other pollutants that are involved here. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Alfred, very, very much. First, I'm just thrilled to have been learning from you on this one too.
Well, thank you very much, Joan.
Thank you, Joan. All right, we have scheduled about 10 or 12 minutes left. So if there's anyone who wants to get a question or a comment in, now would be the time to raise your hand and come forward. And while you're thinking about it, I'm going to throw one more back at you, Alfred. Just responses, reactions, I guess, is what I'm looking for here. Here's the situation. Everyone has their underwear twisted about the radioactive waste areas at Zaporizhia and the nuclear reactors at Zaporizhia because of the potential of a nuclear accident from a misguided missile or a bomb. Yet, we have an American company going to Ukraine, selling them 20 new nuclear reactors. Your response?
It shows how this endeavor defies rationality. That if we really wanted to be safe, if we really wanted to protect the world, protect people, protect nature, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing with the atomic endeavor. And but yet it's this vast economic enterprise that still has the cachet of holding ultimate power, that he who holds the atom, rules. And we have, look at the UN, how it was set up. The permanent members of the Security Council with veto power are nuclear weapon states. Gosh, why is that?
Might makes right.
Yeah.
Okay, we do have a questioner. Janice Wilton from Canada.
Hi,
Sure.
thank you so much for this presentation. I was wondering about your thoughts with the sale of small modular nuclear reactors to all around the world. Like, you know, there's so much turbulence going on now with climate change and things that are going on. Like, it seems to be totally a financial, it's all about money. Like, I would just think that every country would be concerned about having these weapons available with proliferation in every country that's undergoing civil wars and all the kinds of things like that. I just wondered what your comments were on that. Thank you.
Well, I think I agree with you that in a rational world, yes, we'd say, why do we want these things? And that you'd think in Ukraine, it shows us, you know, how can we consider these facilities to be safe in warfare? But yet somehow we're still wanting to build this huge industry so that we can have our new nuclear weapons. And it's very, I sometimes wonder, you know, if it sometimes involves some kind of cultural death wish almost. I mean, because it doesn't make sense. And so that's part of the message I'm trying to get across to people is just having sensible arguments about nuclear power won't win all the arguments because there's a whole big part of it that's not sensical. I mean, it's being driven by these other forces. And if we don't address them, our efforts are for naught.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Alfred. We have one more question, and then I think we'll be wrapping up for the evening. So Stephen, you're going to close us out.
Huh. Well, I spoke already, but as I'm listening to this, perhaps there's some logic in exposing what we're seeing here, that the nuclear power industry is there for nuclear weapons, and to call it like it is. To take away that we need it for this, we need it for that. We really don't. I think we've fairly well proven, although a lot of people doubt, that we'd be better off, quicker off, and cheaper off by renewables and efficiency. So perhaps if we, just a suggestion, expose that it's for the nuclear weapons. We might have a tough time doing it because people want the nuclear weapons. And that's a tough, I'm not sure we could say no more nuclear weapons and get away with it. But anyway, there's an idea for what it's worth. Okay.
Well, I agree with you. It's hard to combat both the value that we impute to nuclear weapons. You know, we need them to be safe. And that it's hard to really see, there's so much good press for nuclear power. You know, we need it. There's this generally good feeling that's been created. So going against those cultural prejudices is a uphill climb.
I'm just suggesting that we expose that the power industry is for nuclear weapons. See what happens. Okay.
Well, I think to make what I'm trying to do is just one quip I have is that things have gotten so difficult with the nuclear power industry that they are resorting to telling the truth that nuclear power really is for national defense. And that's what, you know, if you go to NEI and look up on their webpage under security, you'll see that. It's all about national defense.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. We have one last questioner. Jake is on the phone. You have to unmute yourself and you'll be the last questioner for the night.
We have somebody else with a hand. They raised their hand visually, not.
Oh.
This is this is just by way of announcement. Saturday, August 5th at 11:30 a.m. There's a Hiroshima Day commemoration event being organized by Chicago Area Peace Action and other groups. It will be at Fountain Square downtown Evanston, and I don't know who the speakers are yet. It hasn't all been arranged.
Thanks for the announcement, Jake, and we'll make sure that goes into our calendars. I think Percy, you were waving your hand. Did you want to ask a question or make a comment? And you have to go off mute. You are on mute right now. So take yourself off mute. Nope, you're still on mute. Try again. I'm sorry, we still can't hear you. Maybe click your space bar, see if that does anything. No, that didn't work either. Well, I'm sorry. We lost your camera as well, unfortunately. So, well, oh, Stephanie, you have your hand raised. Go ahead and take yourself off mute.
It's just an announcement, as long as the gentleman before me made one. And this is all, what I want to say, the events are to be determined because the Golden Rule sailboat will be in Chicago from September 10th to the 14th. The Golden Rule promotes nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. It is currently being operated by the Veterans for Peace. And FYI, Alfred, it's going to be in Milwaukee right before it comes down to Chicago.
And I just had the pleasure of seeing the boat today in Bath, Maine,
Oh, cool.
and which is the northernmost part of its journey. And I will also be riding on the boat up the Hudson River from New York City in about a week's time.
Excellent.
And taking part, it's a wonderful endeavor, and I encourage everybody to go to their website and follow it and take part in it.
And
Great, thank
NEI will be organizing
Can you
some
hear me now?
activities around that. Oh, Percy, we got you off of mute. That's good. So I'll go right to you. We'll do announcements later. Thanks, Stephanie. Percy, go ahead.
If you have the time to think about it, think back in the year 1955. I went into the Army at that time because it was the end of Korea. And at that time, I went into a very ultra secret program. They got me in college before I even graduated. And we had atomic warfare where we took the 35-foot big units, the mortars, and we were reducing the heads to atomic heads. And I'm making this very quickly because you have to close down. But what really is interesting, for the U.S. Army came over and we were talking, and he said, "What do you think, Bill, about this program?" Colonel and myself, we had the highest rating. At that time, it was cosmic, which was higher the plus truth. And what was interesting is that they said, "What do you think?" I said, "I think it's terrible. I don't think it'll work, and I don't think you've been thinking about it." Take it easy there. And I said, "Well, the general asked, and I gave my comments." The general asked me again, and then he said, "Colonel, I want you to know, when I leave here, I'm going back to Washington and we're going to discuss what I think Bell thinks about. Because my thought process was, what happens when we've got military that didn't have to put on? And isn't it strange that if we would fire those weapons, how many of the people that's there, and what happens to the farms that cannot plant food anymore for an X amount of years? It's really a tough area. And when you get down to it, we're almost there at this point, because all you read about them is they're doing 80% of their nuclear way of lifestyle, that they are the leaders. I don't think so. But I just wanted you to think about that. That's close to 70 years ago. And when you talk about 70 years and now talking about it again, that's a sad situation. But that's about it. I don't want to talk that much anymore. There is a lot more, but that's it. I really enjoyed this, folks.
Thank you for that story, Percy. Alfred, did you want to respond to that?
Well, I just appreciate what you say.
Pardon me?
I appreciate your story, Percy, and unfortunately, it seems like much of the history of the nuclear enterprise does repeat itself, and that we're just entering a whole new phase of a whole new nuclear arms buildup. We have very few treaties. We have very few mechanisms in place to help defuse things. It's a very, very dangerous time.
Okay, thanks, Percy, and thank you, Alfred. All right, we have one last hand. Jake, take yourself off mute, ask your question or make your comment, and make it quick because we're going to be wrapping up soon. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, this is a question to what is his name? Percy, the previous speaker. Sorry, are you an atomic veteran or what? Hello?
Percy, the question was to you. Are you an atomic veteran? He asked.
What?
Okay, we're not getting you. There we go.
Yes, I am. But that was just then. In fact, 2 years after I left the Army, they came to me and said that we understand you're getting married. And I said, yes. And would you kind of think of maybe dropping her? And I said, what? And they said, yeah. Why don't you drop her? Because she and the person that she's working for, that gentleman is, we think, a pinky. And I said, well, number one, I'm not going to do that. And number two, she happens to be a very, very smart young lady. Haven't you got somebody that took my place? You don't need me anymore. But yes, I guess you could call me an atomic thing.
Thanks, Percy. All right, we are at time. I want to thank Alfred once again for being our guest tonight. This was a little departure from our usual fare, but we seem to always come back to these small modulars and in one way or another. So again, thank you for sharing your history with us, Alfred, your comments, and the connections, which are not often talked about. I also have an announcement to make. Since we're on the topic of small modular reactors, next month, the with the experts on July 27th, we're going to feature Dr. Susan O'Donnell of Canada, because the Canadians are undergoing the same problems that we are in the United States, in that they have a bunch of entrepreneurs and government people who want to build small modulars up there as well. So we have a guest coming from Canada to talk about their programs. We hope to have you back with us next month. Make sure you bring people, tell people about it. And don't forget to register. We've had to go to a registration mode to be a little bit more secure about these. So again, thank you for joining us at Night with the Experts. Alfred and the board members, if you stick around for a bit, at the end, we'll wrap up. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a good evening. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much.